So hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to carry on the Moon series that we have been making. And we are going to discuss what was called Project Horizon, which was where the US Army Corps of Engineers was going to build a moon base on the moon in 1959. And also we are going to discuss Project Moonblink, which was a NASA project where they were actually exploring unusual phenomena on the moon in, I think, around 1965, 1966. And I am joined with my incredible brother, Stephen Denman, today. How are you doing, Steve?
Hi, Zach. I'm doing well. I'm very busy as usual. And how's everything with you?
Very good, my brother. All is good. So first and foremost, just for anybody that's new to the subject on the moon, let's first of all talk about what was Project Horizon and Project Moonblink. Let's talk a little bit about them.
So from the information that's available, we have to also I'll just say we have to take this in the context of positing the idea that the moon itself was modified artificially by advanced ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials, which meant the very reticent military-industrial complex of the MIC became very focused on what was going on the moon. And obviously there's been many accounts of artificial structures, various edifices, exo-archaeological remains on the surface of the moon that do indicate that at least the past there was some kind of presence of ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials. So the moon became a location of immense interest to the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So when it comes to Project Horizon, this was actually a written proposal that started with Lieutenant General Arthur Gilbert Trudeau, who wrote to the US Army Chief of Ordnance during the 27th of March 1959 in support of the objectives that became defined as Project Horizon, which the US Army had already been very focused on developing. And his actual statement that was made to the US Army Chief of Ordnance is listed here. And I'm just going to actually just read this so the actual viewers can get some idea of the outline of what Project Horizon was intended to be about. And he states, I envision expeditious development of the proposal to establish a lunar outpost to be of critical importance to the US Army of the future. This evaluation is apparently shared by the Chief of Staff in view of his expeditious approval and enthusiastic endorsement of initiation of the study. So we can see from this statement by Lieutenant General Arthur Gilbert Trudeau, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers was going to be tasked with logistically developing and manufacturing the equipment, the vehicular types of modern technology that would be needed to survive and thrive and develop on the moon a permanent installation for the United States Army. And therefore this would be seen as a very important development in terms of progressing the military space program, MSP, for the US Defense Department. And it wasn't just about the United States Army. This would obviously relate to various logistical issues in the future if Project Horizon had gone ahead with the United States Navy and the United States Air Force. So we see that Project Horizon really, in terms of it coming from the US Army Corps of Engineers, was a very important logistical proposal that Lieutenant General Arthur Gilbert Trudeau was very much part of. And it was, from that date, the 27th of March, 1959 and onward, it was seen as a very important objective to achieve. Now, we have to remember this was a set of objectives that were focused on eventually dealing with resources management through the extraction of precious metals and minerals on the surface of the moon, and also using eventually the dark side of the moon as a spaceport for launching various kinds of space vehicles further outwardly into the solar system towards Mars and perhaps even the two moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos, and then obviously traveling further out into the outer solar system for exploration purposes, and then eventual resources extraction, so therefore for economic and financial reasons. And so Project Horizon really was a very symbolic objective and proposal by the United States Army Corps of Engineers.
Wow. Okay. And you answered my question, is what was the actual purpose of it? And you're saying to launch further into space. So it was like a spaceport. Now, obviously Project Moonblink followed after that. So when Project Moonblink happened, that was like a surveillance program, because obviously when they went to go and set up the moon base, they obviously discovered other things on the moon, right? So that was probably what was going on, right?
It was definitely going to be connected to it, but you've got to remember this was a few years after the proposals to create Project Horizon had taken place. We have to remember, for example, with the passing of the National Aeronautics and Space Act that took place on the 29th of July 1958, obviously that predates the actual proposal and objective outlines that had been given for Project Horizon. So we can see there was obviously a dual process going on between the military space program, or the MSP, and this emerging civilian space program, or CSP, with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, that was created basically with the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Act on the 29th of July 1958. Project Moonblink was a surveillance process that was instigated and carried out by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, from the 1st of June 1965 to the 30th of June 1966. And it's very much likely it was really designed and intended to map out and locate as many of the anomalies, edifices and unusual or bizarre symmetrical and geometric structures on the surface of the moon. We have to remember that Project Moonblink detected around 28 bizarre events in a relatively short duration of time on the moon. And we have to also remember the Lunar Orbiter 2 took several photographs on the 20th of November 1966 and the 23rd of November 1966. That also showed numerous obelisks upon the surface of the moon that really correlated with much of what had gone on with the surveillance process with Project Moonblink between the 1st of June 1965 to the 30th of June 1965. So what we're seeing is that the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, as really the kind of foundational motion that really put forward this civilian space program, or CSP, was being used as the surveillance arm, for want of a better term, working alongside the United States Army, who would be therefore tasked, say, through Project Horizon, with actually constructing vast installations that would be permanent on the surface of the moon, eventually leading to outposts, which we can class as spaceports on the dark side of the moon, to launch space vehicles, further into the solar system. Obviously, the gravitational field of the moon is far, far weaker than it is on planet Earth. In terms of the thrust that would be needed to launch these space vehicles, that would be far easier to do than it would be obviously launching them directly from planet Earth into the solar system. So, we can posit the idea, but it's just a consideration. Was a lot of what was going on anything connected to obviously the emergence of, in the modern age, what we can class as unidentified flying objects, or UFOs? And obviously we have to remember that around this time, it was really in around these years, we have to really understand how to connect all these different aspects together, because you had the Greada Treaty that was signed on the 20th of February 1954 at Muroc Army Airfield, which became Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County, Southern California. And
do you think it was retrieved? Do you think the what happened at that meeting and the technology that was where they transferred that technology, do you think they used that technology to get to the moon?
I think it was. I mean, it was reverse-based occult technology, meaning it wasn't fully understood from the perspective of the Western mind by the military-industrial complex of the MIC in the United States of America, especially within the U.S. Air Force. What we do know is, there was an exchange going on from these Greadans, or the Tall Greys, the Orion Greys, or the Rigelians, that had been established during the 20th of February 1954 with the US President David Dwight Eisenhower to basically abduct a certain number of American citizens, where blood samples, tissues, and DNA would be extracted, presumably for some kind of hybridization, genetic program that was taking place with these Tall Greys or Rigelians or Orion Greys, for want of a better phrase. And then some of this, reversed-based occult technology possibly could have ended up in both the military space program or the MSP, and perhaps even some aspects of the civilian space program or the CSP with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration or NASA. But what we know is that in terms of speculative perspectives on this, is what was the interconnection between the desire and the impulse to put through Project Horizon a permanent installation on the moon, knowing that it's likely that there was already ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials covertly, in large numbers being present already on the moon for whatever reasons. And was this a way of actually creating a joint type of military space program or MSP between Homo sapiens or human beings and perhaps these Tall Greys or Rigelians or Orion Greys, or perhaps even the Golden Mantids or the Reptoids or whatever, perhaps even the Nordic kind of Pleiadians, or whichever ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials were present on the moon. We know, for example, obviously Ingo Swann, he obviously was one of the greatest scientific remote viewers that's ever lived on planet Earth. He was an absolutely amazing individual. And Ingo Swann obviously had done scientific remote viewing, or SRV sessions, where he had specifically viewed perhaps ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials.
And he was just to say, people should listen to Ingo Swann's early interviews and what he says there, because he was very freaked out what he encountered.
So he had viewed what appeared to be aliens of some type, alien humanoids, for want of a better phrase, extracting minerals or some kind of resources from the surface of the moon. And they had noticed him. They'd noticed that his consciousness was moving outside of linear space-time, and was actually his actual mind outside of his body was observing them, and they were able to start coordinating and tracing back to planet Earth his exact location, which is why he had to literally leave and terminate that scientific remote viewing, or SRV session, to prevent that kind of security threat taking place. So when we look at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, and the development of that organization, we see with Project Moonblink that perhaps it was used for covert purposes, not just for what we've been told it was used for, but to actually look at all these different bizarre anomalies and actually find many other bizarre anomalies that couldn't be discussed or reported in the mainstream media in the United States of America, the Dominion of Canada, or anywhere else on planet Earth. So again, what we're seeing here was a steady bifurcation taking place with the slow emergence of the secret space program, the SSP. That was connected to the Greada Treaty, which took place on the 20th of February 1954 at Muroc Army Airfield, which is now known as Edwards Air Force Base in Kern County in Southern California. The development of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was used really to build a progressive civilian space program, or CSP. The idea of using these vast, rockets to get satellites and space probes into orbit, or to get to the surface of the moon. Really, when you look back, it's incredibly archaic forms of scientific endeavor that don't really match up to really what is known to covertly exist in a lot of the deep underground military bases or D1 bases or DUMs all over planet Earth. And there's now probably thousands of those strategically constructed, not just under the North American continent or mainland Europe and elsewhere, but, you know, even underneath the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and so forth. So a lot of what we are given, whether it's Project Horizon, the more sanitized version of what the intentions of the United States Army Corps of Engineers were meant to be about, from the outlines given by Lieutenant General Arthur Gilbert Trudeau to the US Army Chief of Ordnance during the 27th of March 1959, in support of the overall objectives that were being outlined and emerging at the time and being coined or phrased as Project Horizon. Really remains to be seen. Will we ever know the truth behind what was really going on? I don't think we will. Yeah. I think now that the secret space program and the SSP is so advanced, is so beyond really anything that most Homo sapiens or human beings could comprehend, that it would really seem like a form of ceremonial magic to most individuals. They wouldn't be able to conceive it as any kind of digitally based Western technology. And so it's not going to be an issue in terms of having to somehow translate or integrate that into the education that is given to pupils in schools or students in colleges and universities, especially in the Western world.
Now, I just want to say, like, interestingly, with Project Horizon, it's on Wikipedia, same with Project Moonblink. So if these were part, you know, moving on to the secret space program,
yes,
it's not much of a secret, is it? I mean, what did they relay to the public? Because they have to relay to what they found. So what did they?
Well, they're relaying to the American citizens were given the information that they needed to be given, not the information that they should have been given. Right. So, for example, with the Apollo lunar program, we know that what was actually, so to start with that, much of the footage with the Apollo lunar program, you see, for example, many of the segments of film footage of, you know, the spacecraft orbiting around the moon actually were, from what I have kind of realized through my own research, were probably taken from surveillance cameras on board highly advanced occult technology based reverse engineered spacecraft that really were covertly part of a secret space program on the SSP.
Wow.
And then obviously then you have the civilian space program, or CSP, for propaganda purposes had to still go ahead, because obviously you had the Cold War with the Soviet Union and Communist Russia. The United States of America had to be seen to be first to land astronauts on the surface of the moon, and not allow cosmonauts from Soviet Russia to land on the moon first of all. So, but what was found on the surface of the moon during the actual unbroadcasted, Apollo lunar program was so contentious, would have been so in direct contradiction to what we know that is taught in Western science. Everything that really we are shown, you know, in the education that is given by teachers in schools or lecturers in colleges and universities would start to crumble and fall to pieces, because what was really, I believe, found on the moon is the remnants of a highly advanced interstellar civilization that had existed on the surface of the moon for thousands of years and had been constructed, developed, maintained, and had progressed because of the ingenuity of certain types of ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials. I also believe the moon is not from this solar system. I believe it was steered by the use of a singularity through the interstellar medium, perhaps from a constellation like Ursa Minor, maybe from some other part of this solar system. Perhaps it had existed in the outer solar system. Maybe it had once been, you know, in orbit, as some have said. And again, this is open to speculation, that our moon had originally been brought into the solar system and was placed into orbit originally around Jupiter. And then it had moved, or had been steered and navigated further into the solar system, and was eventually placed into orbit around planet Earth. Now, again, all that's open to speculation, but there is a lot of evidence to actually prove that, and we're not going to have really time to go into that in this Sacred Wisdom podcast.
I just want to pick up on what you said about Jupiter, because Jupiter's got like 96 moons apparently. So do you think these moons are inhabited in the same way? Do you think that all moons, Saturn, I think, has got 146 moons, and that changes as well, fluctuates the number. They discover moons around Jupiter. So what do you think? Do you think these are kind of like that the actual moons of planets are actually types of bases?
I think it's actually far more common amongst ultra-terrestrials and extraterrestrials to excavate out various spherical masses that we can call moons. Whether that in our solar system, whether it's the Jovian moons, the Saturnian moons, the Uranian moons, or the Neptunian moons, or even many of the various unusual objects that exist within the Great Oort cloud, right at the very perimeter of the outer solar system.
Yeah,
I think a lot of them are used as detection outposts. They're used as refueling stations, as observation installations. I think they're used for scientific researches to do in sort of laboratory installations, all kinds of different reasons by different types of ultra-terrestrials and extraterrestrials. I also believe that many of these moons in our solar system, let alone the vast numbers that exist throughout the Milky Way galaxy, the Sagittarius dwarf spheroidal galaxy, which interconnects with the Milky Way galaxy, and obviously the trillions of other galaxies across the physical universe. So I would say that many of these excavated out moons are interconnected, as with many different planetary masses, with subspace electromagnetic ley lines, for want of a better term, which are really, in terms of a much grander scale than what we see with geomagnetic ley lines here on planet Earth. Obviously, the geomagnetic ley lines exist on the planet Mars, and so on. So we do know that this is going on. It's very likely this interconnects with how they fold space-time and can travel thousands of light years within seconds or minutes. Yeah. And I think, it goes into really the etheric realm of transdimensional physics or hyperdimensional physics, really, when we're discussing this subject. So
what just with Project Moonblink, what did they discover? Because obviously they would have taken photographs. It being a public operation, they must have come across some strange objects. I know they found they echo what Ingo Swann's viewed when he remote viewed, and they actually showed obelisks and picture of pyramids. I've seen the pictures online. I'm not sure about them. You tell me.
Well, I mean, Project Moonblink has that was a surveillance process that took place between the 1st of June 1965 to the 30th of June 1966 by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was designed to observe unusual or bizarre events that were taking place on the surface. One example is intermittent blinking lights that would be observed inside the rims of some of the largest craters on the surface of the moon. I think they were blinking intermittent every 2 seconds or so, and would continue seeing and observe doing that for many hours, which didn't really make any sense because no such artificially constructed installations had been placed there by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, and it certainly had not been placed there by the United States Army Corps of Engineers under any tutelage or guidance or instruction by Lieutenant General Arthur Gilbert Trudeau, working alongside the US Army Chief of Ordnance and other designated officials and individuals, or within the United States Army itself. So the question you have to ask is, was there already some kind of highly developed secret space program, or SSP, that had bifurcated away from the US Defense Department, perhaps after World War II ended on the 8th of May 1945? Or was it the case that the moon was still occupied by certain kinds of ultra-terrestrials or extraterrestrials that for some reason perhaps were using those intermittent lights that was seen during Project Moonblink as navigation lights to guide in certain types of spacecraft so they could land safely. Again, that's open to speculation. We have to also remember that many of the craters on the surface of the moon were once believed to have been actually canopied with a pure silicon dioxide or glass sheath, effectively making them disc-shaped or circular-shaped, covered areas, presumably for habitation purposes, perhaps for the growing of fruits and vegetables. So again, it's all open for speculation, but I don't really by the kind of constant lies and half truths of officialdom when it comes to the moon. There's too many anomalies in terms of
totally.
Mathematical probability. You would never have this number of anomalies on the surface of the moon. So yes, a Project Horizon was one aspect of this that was really given its clarification during the 27th of March 1959, and then you see a Project Moonblink that took place from the 1st of June 1965 to the 30th of June 1966, really being used as a method to observe bizarre topographical events or different strange activities that may be going on the surface of the moon. And
I just want to say, with Project Horizon, obviously it's again public information, you can read it on Wikipedia. So why then, it was like 10 years later around that time that we went on to the moon, so why are they then announcing creating a moon base like 10 years prior to that? I mean, it seems kind of completely dislodged. Like
that's what I believe happened was between those dates, so between the kind of development of Project Horizon, which eventually didn't obviously take place, it was the whole idea was basically poo-pooed and sidelined, and the development of the Apollo lunar program, it was during those two periods that discoveries were covertly made on the moon, meaning that Project Horizon had to become a covert objective. And I believe they still did go ahead and construct permanent installations on the surface of the moon. But because of what had been discovered, they could no longer publicly, announce to the American people, to the citizens of the Dominion of Canada, to Homo sapiens or human beings all around planet Earth. All of it had to become completely covert as really another extended aspect of the secret space program of the SSP. Now, what we know is, as I mentioned earlier, with the Lunar Orbiter 2, which took several photographs on the 20th of November 1966 and the 23rd of November 1966, it clearly showed in those photographs numerous obelisks that were standing fully erect, that hadn't collapsed in the passage of time on the surface of the moon. One of the obelisks that the Lunar Orbiter 2 actually photographed was seen to be over 150 feet tall on the surface of the moon.
Wow.
So that in itself doesn't make sense if the moon, is devoid of artificial constructs. And what are we actually being given here as factual information? As in terms of Western science, we have to remember that Dr. Bruce Cornett, for example, mentioned the following about the obelisks that had been observed by the Lunar Orbiter 2. And he stated the following: the spires were arranged in precisely the same way as the aspices of the three Great Pyramids. So that in itself is very interesting to know. You have to remember in the Cydonia region of the planet Mars, you have five-sided Martian pyramids, you have four-sided Martian pyramids, and in some areas what appear to be certain types of paneled geodesic domes that are absolutely vast in size, but are covered up under tons and tons of iron oxide enriched sand on the surface of the planet Mars, most of which originally had been soil, as the planet Mars had been very fertile, obviously, but that's a discussion for another day. We also know, for example, upon the surface of the moon, the formation defined as the Shard and the Obelisk brightly surges 1.5 miles or 2.4 kilometers from the Yokuts crater. Now, we know that the shard, or the obelisk, was discovered by Lunar Orbiter 3 on the 8th of February 1967. So Dr. Bruce Cornett, who studied the amazing photographs of the Lunar Orbiter 3 that had been taken on the 8th of February 1967, also stated no known natural process can explain such a structure. Now, what is interesting to note, when Dr. Bruce Cornett mentioned his views concerning the obelisk that was observed to be more than 150 feet tall, he had stated the spires were arranged in precisely the same way as the auspices of the three Great Pyramids. It was also inferred that these structures on the surface of the moon also had geometric alignments to many of the huge Chinese pyramids that are known to exist in the Shenxi province, which is in, obviously, the People's Republic of China.
Yeah, amazing.
So that therefore,
fascinating.
That logic would dictate there may possibly be alignments with some of the actual structures on the moon with the various five-sided pyramids and four-sided pyramids on the planet Mars, and perhaps even in other parts of the solar system, many of which may already be known to the operatives that maintain the secret space program, the SSP. But obviously, this kind of information is not readily available to, obviously, Joe public. So,
and you're right, Steve. And most people aren't even aware that there are pyramids in China. I mean, there's a lot of pyramids in China. Yeah. Which is kind of unbelievable.
And also the same is obviously in the Fosoko Valley in Bosnia in southeastern Europe. So you have the pyramid. Well, you've got what is called the Pyramid of the Sun, or the Solar Pyramid, right, and the Pyramid of the Moon, or the Lunar Pyramid.
Yeah. Well,
there's been many, there's been many accounts, on various blogs and forums across the internet that connect the alignment of the Pyramid of the Sun, the Solar Pyramid, the Pyramid of the Moon, or the Lunar Pyramid in the Fosoko Valley in Bosnia with the shard and the obelisk on the moon. And now, how, in terms of geometric alignment, that has been calculated is really too much to go into in this Sacred Wisdom podcast. But it appears as though, in terms of hyperdimensional physics, there was a vast interconnected alignment between various world pyramids, for want of a better term, on planet Earth, Martian pyramids, perhaps pyramids that were on other spherical masses, such as the planet Venus, and perhaps various Jovian moons, Saturnian moons, Uranian moons, and Neptunian moons in the outer solar system. So it's very interesting that none of this is really discussed. You don't even hear it being discussed by individuals who are experts when it comes to world archaeology, or to do with any other kinds of aspects of individuals that study seemingly credible subjects that are defined with acceptance and conventional ease by in Western science, without any conflict or sense of being sidelined or ignored.
It's amazing, Steve, and that there are two incredible projects that have gone on and really state so much. And obviously, you had the Greada Treaty and Project it really does state a lot of what's happened. And then obviously the public moon landing, we can see a real pattern there. So you can see and also you can see why there is so much of history deleted, because there seems to be this huge power, this force that does not want people to know about this information, and it will do anything at any cost to make sure that people don't know. And I believe this is why the old world and all this ancient knowledge and ancient history that we're taught, or not taught, should I say, and we're taught this superficial story that doesn't make much sense. But Steve, that's amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, although it's not seen as that relevant perhaps by some individuals, I do think that when the National Aeronautics and Space Act was passed on the 29th of July 1958, which obviously was the legislation that was passed that allowed for the establishment of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, that was itself really an ensign that's really stated, without actually stating anything in terms of its wording, that the civilian space program, or the SSP, was really going to be rolled out over the following decades as a way for the military-industrial complex of the MIC to disguise the actual development and the continual bifurcation that had resulted in and the advancement of the secret space program of the SSP, which was so far beyond anything that the American people could really comprehend. There's no way that it was going to be shared or it was going to be broadcast in the mainstream media.
Yeah. And
so
do you think that
I think that in itself is significant, that piece of legislation, and the fact that Project Horizon never really took place. It was the amount of logistical effort that went into developing Project Horizon, for those of you out there who are viewing this Sacred Wisdom podcast, was staggering. The schematics, the diagrams, the actual the building construction designs that were drawn up, that were drafted, that were put together, the amount of meetings that went on by senior ranking officers within the United States Army was absolutely incredible. There was so much effort and US tax dollars put in to investing in it was incredible. And then the whole objective was simply sidelined and shut down.
But you can see,
which doesn't really make any sense. So
but you can see the way it's happened. It's gone so, like you said, it's gone so far ahead, and obviously probably because of a few people, I would say, that just wanted that power. There's probably been a lot of people along the way very concerned, and you can see that happening now. There is concerning people coming forward, and they can see the effects that it's having on society and humanity. And this is really, really, so we're at that breaking point, I feel, with all this information. I think, we're going to see some quite incredible things happen over the next 5 years, I feel, with all this. This is going to be developing more and more. But Steve, that was brilliant and that absolutely amazing.
So I think it's important to mention, just rounding this up, some of the quotes from various mainstream publications that have really looked at the anomalies, the various bizarre geometric structures and so forth that have been seen on the surface of the moon. So during the 29th of July 1953, on page 18 of the New York Herald Tribune, the science editor of the Herald Tribune staff, known as John Joseph O'Neill, reported that whilst looking at the moon, a 12-mile or 19-kilometer crystalline bridge or lunar bridge had been observed by him that was straddling the Mare Crisium crater. Now, after some consideration, the article, which was called On the So-Called Lunar Bridge, was then published during the 7th of October 1955 on page 33 of volume 8 in the Bulletin of the Astronomical Institutes of Czechoslovakia by Josef Václav Sedil. This article is stored on the NASA Astrophysics Data System, or ADS, and Josef Václav Sedil was apparently employed at the Stefanik Observatory at Prague in the Bohemia region of the Western Czech Republic. And here is what Joseph Václav Sedil wrote about the artificial structure upon the moon, which John Joseph O'Neill had actually seen. And I quote, on July 29th, 1953, Mr. J. O'Neill, science editor of the New York Herald Tribune, was observing the eastern border of the Mare Crisium, which was then illuminated by a setting sun. Using a 4-inch refractor enlargement 90 times, he saw an illuminated area on the floor of Mare Crisium, adjoining the eastern rampart. O'Neill interpreted this area as sunlight penetrating here through a great natural bridge or arch appearance in the eastern wall of Mare Crisium.
Wow. Amazing. So they'd built a flyover on the moon.
It would appear that it was some kind of transportation bridge. What it was actually made of, it was if it's crystal. I mean, it's known that silicon dioxide or glass, if it's produced in the vacuum of space, it is extremely strong. It's incredibly tough in terms of its molecular structure. So it appears it was perhaps some kind of access passage an access pathway or some kind of transportation route across Mare Crisium on the surface of the moon. So there you go.
Amazing, Stephen. As always, incredible knowledge and research, and you bring it so well, and obviously also articulate it so well, which is brilliant. And yeah, we live in them times where this information's coming to the surface, and this is all part of the process we're going through, wherever we're going to get to with all this. But this is all part of it, where we're kind of raising information, and you can see
absolutely
publicly the stuff coming out, and what NASA are talking about, what is being reported on the news is happening. I did to say I had a theory about UFOs, and obviously there's been a huge increase in UFOs in the last however long, the last couple of years. And I think that the reason why there's actually an increase is more to do with the fact that people are actually looking up more and actually looking up at the sky more. I don't think it's necessarily that we are having an increase. These UFOs have been around for eons of years, and it's stupid to think that they're suddenly appearing and they're all coming out to say hello. There is definitely this kind of process where people are becoming more conscious, which is probably is a good thing. So it's great.
That's right.
Just to say, we have got our book finally finished, and well done to Stephen, because Stephen did so much work on this. And it's Vanished Kingdoms, which is available in paperback and hardback on Amazon and on my website at the moment. And we're going to be doing a lot more of that. There's also going to be sections in the members section, from various chapters, and we'll be talking a lot more about it in coming videos. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you, members. Thank you, Patreons. And it's a bye from me for now.
And it's goodbye from me.